voice steady but edged with concern. "I appreciate what you're doing, but this is my fight. I don't want the girl seeing ugliness tonight." Big Mike turned, his expression softening for just a moment. "Brother, you fought ugliness your whole life. Tonight, you ain't alone in it." Hank's face reddened with anger. He revved the truck's engine, the tires spinning slightly on the asphalt. The men in the back hooted and hollered, tossing their empty bottles into James's yard. One shattered against the fence, making Alana flinch. That was enough. The angels surged forward, not with fists, not with violence, but with the kind of unity that could crush a man's spirit. 24 bikers closed in around the truck, engines roaring as they fired them up, headlights blazing directly into Hank's windshield. The truck was surrounded in seconds, trapped in a cage of steel and chrome. Big Mike leaned down, his face inches from Hank's window. His voice was calm, deadly calm. "You had your say. Now you're gonna leave. You throw one more bottle, one more word at this man's house, and you'll learn what it means to pick the wrong fight." The drunk bravado drained from Hank's face. He glanced at the shadows of tattooed arms resting casually on handlebars, at the glint of chains and the weight of men who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that hate didn't make him powerful. With a shaky breath, he shifted the truck into reverse. The men in the back had fallen silent, their laughter gone. Slowly, carefully, the pickup rolled backward down the street until its red tail lights disappeared around the corner. The roar of Harleys died down again, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against the skin. James exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. He looked down at Alana, who was staring wide-eyed at the angels, her small hand still gripping his. "Grandpa," she whispered, "they scared them away." James knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, baby. They showed them what real strength looks like. It ain't in shouting or throwing bottles. It's in standing tall for what's right." Big Mike overheard and gave James a nod of quiet respect. The neighbors, who had been watching from their porches, began retreating inside. None of them dared to meet James's eyes. For years they had spoken down to him, laughed at his hardships, mocked his sacrifice. Tonight they had seen something they couldn't explain. A man they considered beneath them, being lifted higher than they could ever reach. The angels didn't stay much longer. They weren't there to claim turf or cause trouble. They had come for one purpose: to make sure James Carter knew he was not forgotten, not mocked, not alone. Before leaving, Big Mike shook James's hand firmly. "We'll be back to ride with you. Anytime you need us, brother, you send word. Family looks after family." James's throat tightened. He nodded once, unable to speak past the lump in his chest. When the last Harley disappeared into the night, the street felt empty, but not in the way it had before. The silence wasn't loneliness, it was peace. James lifted Alana into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, already drifting to sleep. The sound of engines still buzzing in her dreams. For the first time in a long while, James Carter believed tomorrow might be better than yesterday. And he knew deep, in his bones, that even in a world built on cruelty and hate, there were still men willing to stand shoulder to shoulder against it. Morning sunlight spilled across the Carter home, golden rays slipping through the curtains and warming the worn floorboards. James woke to the sound of birdsong instead of engines. The night's tension felt like a distant memory, but the weight of what had happened remained in the air. Alana was still asleep in her little bed, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The medicine he'd fought so hard to afford was working. She had color in her cheeks again, and the fever that had haunted her for weeks seemed to have loosened its grip. James sat beside her quietly, whispering a prayer of thanks. He looked out the window toward the empty street. No Harleys, no angry trucks, just stillness. Yet the roar of the angels lingered in his heart, not as noise, but as a promise. Later that morning, James brewed a pot of coffee and stepped onto the porch. His new Harley, gifted by the angels, gleamed under the rising sun. Its chrome reflected his lined face. Weathered by years of war, work, and struggle, he ran a hand along the handlebars, feeling the weight of what it meant. It wasn't just a motorcycle. It was a message: you are not forgotten. You are worth standing for. For decades, James had carried the burden of being both a veteran and a Black man in a town that respected neither. He had endured slurs, rejection, and indifference. Yet here, in his twilight years, a band of men most feared and misunderstood had shown him a level of respect his neighbors never had. By mid-afternoon, a few townsfolk drifted by. Some pretended they were just out walking. Others lingered at their fences, curiosity gnawing at them. None spoke directly to James, but he could feel their eyes on him. Mrs. Turner, an elderly white woman who had lived down the block for decades, finally approached. She clutched a basket of biscuits in trembling hands. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, avoiding his eyes, I thought you might like these." For the little girl, James studied her for a long moment. He remembered the times she'd crossed the street to avoid him, the years she'd never once spoken a kind word. But now, something in her voice was different, hesitant, uncertain, maybe even ashamed. "Thank you, ma'am," he said gently, taking the basket. "Alana will appreciate them." She nodded quickly and hurried back down the steps, as though ashamed of even that small gesture. James didn't hold it against her. Change came slow, but it came all the same. That evening, James wheeled the Harley to the curb. He hadn't ridden in years, not since his body began to protest. But tonight felt different. Tonight wasn't about speed or power, it was about legacy. Alana came bounding out of the house, her eyes wide with excitement. "Grandpa, are you gonna ride it?" James smiled, patting the seat. "Not yet, baby girl, but one day, maybe." "You will." Her face lit up. "Me? Why not? This bike ain't just a machine. It's a story. It's about sacrifice, about standing tall, about people who show up when you least expect them. Someday, when you're older, you'll understand. And when that day comes, this bike will be yours." Alana climbed up onto the seat, gripping the handlebars with tiny hands. She made a playful engine noise with her mouth, her laughter echoing through the quiet street. James watched, his heart swelling with pride. She would grow up knowing the truth. That strength wasn't about fists or fury, but about love, sacrifice, and the courage to keep going, no matter how heavy the world became. Over the following weeks, James noticed subtle shifts in the town. Some neighbors still looked at him with disdain, but others, like Mrs. Turner, softened. A few even waved as they passed, gestures small but meaningful. The story of that night had spread quickly. People whispered about the HELLS angels filling James Carter's street, about how a man they had written off as nothing had been honored by one of the most feared biker clubs in America. Fear changed people, but respect could too. The racists who had mocked James grew quieter. Their courage had melted under the weight of roaring engines, and though hate didn't disappear overnight, it no longer sat so loudly on his doorstep. One Sunday afternoon, James sat with Alana on the porch swing. She leaned against him, clutching a worn children's book. "Grandpa," she asked, her voice curious, "why did those men come for you? You didn't even call them." James thought for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes when you give up something for the people you love, the world finds a way to give back. I sold my old Harley for your medicine, baby girl. And the angels, they heard about it. They knew what it meant. They wanted to show you that love and sacrifice matter more than hate." Alana looked thoughtful. "So, you gave up one bike and they gave you another?" James chuckled. "Something like that. But it wasn't really about the bike. It was about reminding us that we're not alone, no matter how it feels sometimes." She nodded slowly, her small brow furrowing as she processed his words. Then she leaned up and kissed his cheek. "I'm glad you did it, Grandpa. I'm glad you sold it, 'cause now I'm better." Tears stung James's eyes. He pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "Me too, baby, me too." Years later, Alana would tell this story again and again. She would speak of her grandfather, the veteran who gave up his pride to save her life. She would speak of the HELLS angels, who filled a street with their thunder to protect a man who had once stood alone. And she would ride that Harley, carrying not just its chrome and steel, but the weight of a legacy built on love, sacrifice, and resilience. James Carter would not be remembered as the man who lost his bike, but as the man who taught his granddaughter that dignity cannot be stolen, and that even in the face of racism and cruelty, love will always roar louder. And when the engines echoed in her dreams, Alana would smile, because she knew they weren't just Harleys, they were a promise. a promise that her grandfather's story and his fight would live on.